Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good morning to all respected professors, doctor, lecturers, fellow veterinarians from public and private sectors, and also dear students. Welcome to the third series of CITRA Profesor UMK, a professional talk series organized by University Malaysia Kelantan. First and foremost, I would like to thank everyone for allocating time to attend this talk series. And for today's session, we are grateful to have Professor Dr. Muhammad Azam Han Goriman Han from Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, University Malaysia Kelantan, to share with us an interesting topic entitled Animal Health and Production in the Face of COVID-19 Pandemic Role of Veterinarians. It is an honor to me to introduce our respected speaker for today. So Prof. Dr. Muhammad Azam is the current Dean of the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine UMK, and then he obtained a Diploma in Science Education from UPM in 1983, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from UPM in 1988, and graduated with PhD from University of Glasgow, Scotland in 1997. So he has vast experiences in academic field and livestock industry for the past 30 years and developed specialization in the fields of equine reproduction, medicine and surgery, large animal internal medicine, and also small ruminant management and production diseases. So our guest speaker today also contributes and participates actively in the professional association related to veterinary fraternity in Malaysia, in particular with Veterinary Association of Malaysia, Malaysia Society of Animal Production, Malaysia Equine Veterinary Association, and also Malaysia Zoological Society. Ladies and gentlemen, let us back to our topic for today. So COVID-19 pandemic has a substantial impact on many sectors at global, regional, and also national level, including the livestock sector. So the action taken in many countries, including Malaysia, such as lockdown, travel restriction, and border control, have resulted in unintended or negative consequences for the livestock and animal production sectors. So for instance, we can see a difficulty in moving live animals and animal products to the market, restricted capacity to purchase necessary production inputs, and also restricted access to labor and professional service. And this difficulty has led to decrease in processing capacity for animal products, as well as loss of sales and slowdown of the market activity. And ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to welcome Professor Dr. Muhammad Azam to further elaborate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic to animal health and production and discuss the roles of veterinarian to mitigate the impacts.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farhan. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, everybody. First and foremost, before I start, allow me dalam this next couple of minutes to talk secara very informal, secara bersantai, because I think the audience present today is varied, comprises of academicians as well as people from the industry and some farmers as well. I want to start by saying that a couple of months ago, I was approached to give a talk on CITRA Profesor University Malaysia Kelantan, and I was asked of a title that I think appropriate at this point in time. And I gave a title which was Animal Health, Animal Production Post-COVID, the Role of Veterinarians. I'd like to make some changes to the title today. Obviously, when that title was made, the MCO was already lifted to a certain extent, and but unfortunately, we are still having this crisis of COVID, and we are still having movement control, and therefore, I think a more appropriate title would be Animal Health and Production in the face of COVID-19 and our role as veterinarians. I thank you all for taking the time to present. These are my views that I will put forward in the next couple of minutes, and perhaps at the end of it, we would be able to discuss a little bit further. on the issues related to COVID-19 and the role of veterinarians. Also an opportunity through this talk this morning for me to sort of introduce the role of veterinarians to the common public, our function to the common public. Next. Now, I'd like to start off with this slide. This is a slide from the dashboard of the World Health Organization. Now, if you were to look at these numbers at a glance, the COVID-19 pandemic has already affected 36,754,395 positive confirmed cases. Of these confirmed cases, there were 1,064,838 deaths. And the pandemic has actually affected more than 235 areas throughout the world. Now, if you were to look at these data, it would appear morbid. You would have a morbid comfort considering that historically, global pandemics that we've had in the past had also seen mortalities that were far greater than what we are seeing now with the COVID-19. For example, you have the Hong Kong flu. This was during between the 68 to 70s. Mortality rates, we have more than 1 million deaths as a result of the Hong Kong flu. In terms of population and the number of population at that time, number of deaths that was considered high. Smallpox pandemic, 1877 to 1977, it was a long history of smallpox pandemics, mortality rate exceeding 35%. There was Black Plague caused by a senior pestis, more than 200 million deaths. Spanish flu, 100 million deaths. 100,000 million deaths. HIV, 32 million. And the third pandemic plague between 1855 and 1960, again in mortalities ranging from about 10 to 90% depending on whether they were treated or not. So COVID-19, when you look at that data, then you would have figured that COVID-19, basically the mortality rates are not as high. Having said that, perhaps one of the reasons for it was our advancement in medicine and so on and medical care. So the economy or the financial strain on managing this disease would have gone beyond what we would have expected. Next slide, please. So we have learned to manage and curb this condition. By now, it's a common fact. In the meantime, while waiting, there's a race to produce a vaccine against COVID-19. In the meantime, we are doing what is necessary to curb the disease or to put the disease at our borders. And we're talking about face masking up. Everyone is expected to mask up. We are prevented from the social distancing, prevented from kissing and hugging and handshaking, the need to wash hands, the need to remember that you would like to sneeze into a tissue or into a sleeve and to get rid of the tissue after that, proper ventilation of your environment, and keeping a distance from people in all circumstances, in all workplace circumstances, in the way we do things, in the way we market, in the way we move around. So this is what we call norms that are now taking shape, which are beyond what we have ever envisaged before. Next slide, please. Next. So there are a lot of literatures now with regards to how this virus, COVID-19, has impacted us. It has impacted at the global, it has impacted at the regional and at the national level, and also including the livestock sector. Now, in a three-tier economy, where the manufacturing economy, service economy, and innovation economy runs the country, it affects the service economy, the manufacturing economy, and the innovation economy. So, if you were to look at the industry now, a lot of sectors are being affected: maintenance and repairs, housekeeping, the touring industry. If a country depends on tourism, then it is affected, and even education. Universities are affected, and we are changing the way we do things. A lot of the things that we do are being done online now. But in the livestock sector, next slide. Well, what action was taken as a result of this COVID-19 pandemic? A lot of countries went on to lockdown. There were travel restrictions and there were border controls. And that was how every nation safeguard their nationals and tried to curb the numbers of people who are infected with COVID-19. Next slide, please. While the results that are seen as a result of these measures are good, it has its unintended or negative consequences in many other sectors, particularly the service sectors, and as well as the livestock sector. I'm going to emphasize a little bit on the livestock sector, solely because of our role as veterinarians. And some of the things that have been documented now as a result of this lockdown are, among things, difficulty of moving live animals and animal products like milk, meat, and eggs to the market. There were restrictions potentially preventing imports of livestock. This we see traditionally Malaysia import a large number of live animals from Australia and across our border from Thailand. And in face of the pandemic, there were a lot of restrictions, and this was clearly seen, especially during the Eid Fitri and the Eid Adha celebration. There were very few numbers available, and as a result, the Skorban festivals was limited in the number of animals that were actually sacrificed during the festivities. There were restricted capacity to purchase necessary production inputs. Our reliance on corn and soybean for the animal feed manufacturing production market. There were restricted access to labor. There was constraints on farm. Some labor force had actually left the country, and with the closure of borders and so on, they were not able to return. They were confined to farms, and movement was restricted. These affect farm outputs. Farmers' moral and farm coordination was affected, and the provision of professional services were also interrupted. I think it took a while before the veterinary services were seen as an essential services at that point in time. So these are some of the things that were documented with regards to the effect of COVID-19 on the livestock sector. Next slide, please. There were fears of an animal to human transmission of disease during the period of time, even though there were reports initially of an animal to human transmission. These reports were very, very rare, and no other reports on animal to human transmission were seen over the last how many months? March, April, May, June, July, over the last 7 months or so. Now, of course, the veterinary department, they respond to these fears by implying or telling the community that cats and dogs are not sources for spread of this infection. Having said that, a lot of surveillance has got to be done and continue to monitor about spread of infection from animals to humans. Next slide, please. There were worries and concern about personnel working in food processing plants who were confirmed positive for COVID. And as a result of that, whether the food products that are coming out of that plants would be safe for human consumption and so on. So again, the department has to respond and alleviate the fears of infection coming from feed products. Next slide, please. Now, Malaysia used to import large number of goods, particularly from Australia. And in the lead up to Ramadan Eid Fitri, which was traditionally a peak period for Australian goat exporters to export live goats into Malaysia, it was noted that there was an overall reduction or decline in this export by about 85%. That's a huge number of reduction. We even have reports from Leong Hap, one of the largest producer of poultry products. It was noted that there was a lower egg chicken demand after the virus outbreak. It cuts Leong Hap profit by close to 64%. And even when we were talking among livestock producers, the comment was always a reduction in demand as a result of the COVID-19. So the poultry company said that its broiler chicken and day-old chicks saw lower average selling prices as a result of it, and that affected the revenues in the industry. At about that time, when the COVID pandemic was on, there was also swine fever, the African flu, African swine fever, swine flu in the countries bordering us, particularly in Southeast Asia. So if we were to look at the reports by FAO, there was an indication that during that period, countries reported less cases of swine flu or African swine fever, perhaps because of slackening in the surveillance for this disease in Southeast Asia. We have a task of making sure that this disease do not cross our borders and come into Malaysia itself at that point in time. In some ways, perhaps the MCO, the movement control order, was good in that it prevented, as a result of that, it prevented movement of animals across border and across states. And to a certain extent, that perhaps may have curtailed the possibility of bringing in an infection from across the border. The African horse sickness was a rare case that was reported in Malaysia at that point in time. The vets played an important role in preventing spread of the African horse fever to other parts of the state. Quarantines were put into place, and animal movements, or horse movement, were restricted. And the department has reported that they were the only 5 isolated cases reported. All horses that were down with the African horse sickness were eventually culled. Next slide, please. Now, one interesting feature as a result of the pandemic, was the continuous need of pet owners for veterinary healthcare services despite the movement control order. And that pushed or forced us to reshape the way we do things. So a lot of pet owners would then call into the veterinary clinic to request for health advice. And a lot of this advice was given over the telephone or via video calls. And something that we have not done in the past as a norm, which is what is telemedicine. And how vets responded was basically by having video calls and identifying problems that are associated from the video calls that they have with clients. What was forced onto us was the use of technology to deliver or to exchange medical information. We were able to visually observe patients through Skype calls, and then particularly for perhaps a follow-up and examination that was done, or post-operative procedure that was done prior to the MCO, we'll be able to discuss and continue to provide the professional healthcare needed by the clients and our patient. Vets were able to actually, as a result of the COVID-19, pushed into using telecommunications to learn and consult. So in general practice, the communication between vets and specialists, I think, was further enhanced. Advice was given over the phone. The term we use is tele-advice. General advice that was not intended to diagnose, prognose, treat, or correct something, but this advice was basically given to ensure that the client and the patient would continue to have the best health care during the period of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this continued, and eventually certain procedures were put into place. Vets will now have to change the way they provide these healthcare services to their patients. So when patients used to walk into a veterinary clinic, now there are some changes. They are not encouraged to come into clinics. So there were a lot of other issues that affect comfort. For example, clients will have to wait outside a particular clinic and before they are allowed to walk into clinics. Clients that have been confirmed to be in contact with patients, with people who have been confirmed positive for COVID perhaps, and they need to bring their pets to the clinic, then the pets are collected at the curb, and the clients are not allowed to move into the premise of the clinic. So veterinarians start to put on personal protective equipment in handling these animals and so on. So these are some of the changes taken, and those changes are basically to ensure that the premises and the safety of staffs handling animals are also taken into consideration. So perhaps telehealth and telemedicine in veterinary practice was done as a result of the pressure of COVID-19 onto us, and it would probably open the opportunities for telehealth and telemedicine to be part of a veterinary curriculum for the future. Perhaps this would also be a change on how veterinarians would actually handle healthcare in the future. Appointments for patients that needed or need to come into the veterinary services, and priorities for cases that are considered emergency against normal health care needs. Next slide, please, Farah. So perhaps the future is now. The COVID pandemic has pushed us fast forward into the future in the way things are conducted. Numerous webinars were conducted to continue to strengthen competencies and skill among vets during the pandemic. Online learning became a norm within the higher education providers. Online discussions and evaluation of patient became something that is becoming a new norm, and as this continues and as we continue to engage ourselves with these activities, we become more familiar with how we can use advanced telecommunication in the provision of veterinary healthcare. So this will set in, and in time, I think it will be accepted. Of course, there are a lot of morality and ethics issues that are associated with it, which has got to be addressed. But it gives us the opportunity, the COVID-19 pandemic, the chaos that it has resulted gives us an opportunity to create something new and perhaps something better in the way we do things for the future. Now, next slide, please. Now, over the last couple of years, there has been talk on the role of veterinarians in insect farming and the possibility of having insects as a sustainable and healthy alternative to animal protein. This has been a topic for teaching and learning in some veterinary schools. Because insects are probably vectors to a lot of disease, so the role of veterinarians in the farming and culture of insects as a source of protein is slowly taking on. So this is something that we probably have to look. The population is increasing, and as a result of that, there's not enough food to go around, but there are a lot of insects. So I reckon the time will come when insect proteins as a source of animal protein for human consumption as well as for livestock consumption is something that will be looked into. Having said that, next slide. Insects as a food source is already common in some Southeast Asian cultures and community. So these are some of the things that we have to look in as a result of pressures that are exerted onto the way we do normal things in the veterinary profession. Next slide, please. So that brings us down to the issue of food security and food sovereignty. Our role, apart from treating animals, taking care of wounds, preventing spread of infection and so on, our role goes beyond that. There are roles of veterinarian, particularly in livestock production, and basically it is to ensure the production of safe and healthy livestock sources for human consumption. So it allows the vet to actually partake in animal production. And how do we go about it? So one is food security. The role of vet is to ensure that there is that animals are produced and that reach from the tables from farms are actually healthy, nutritious, and safe for human consumption. The other issue is food sovereignty. I like a different definition to food sovereignty. If you look at the definition that they have on food sovereignty, it's about food not being a commodity, but rather food being controlled by the people who farm them, and they are the ones who have a say on how to market, how to produce, and how to sell the local products that they produce. I prefer the definition of food sovereignty to be able, for a nation to be able to produce sufficient so that it doesn't kneel down in the event of a crisis, as in the case of perhaps COVID-19 or in past pandemics. Now, how do vets play a role in food security and food sovereignty? Next slide, please. The next series of slides is going to, I'll be showing you some of the data we have as far as livestock production is concerned in Malaysia. So if we talk about self-sufficiency, we are already self-sufficient as far as poultry, swine, and egg production is concerned. We have not yet reached a satisfactory self-sufficiency level when we talk about meat, beef, mutton, chicken production. The ruminant sector is not as well developed as the poultry sector. There could be a lot of reasons for this. The poultry sector is actually private sector driven. And a lot of these huge commercial farms, private sector driven commercial farms, they are organized, and they have within their organization veterinarians and animal technicians who are able to actually monitor, regulate and control the activities related to farm production, talking about animal health, feed conversion, feed quality, and production gains on a regular basis. They involve communities and they provide technical advice to communities. So in short, within the private sector, there are what is called technical extension officers who actually continue to service the farmers that are within their projects. So I think perhaps there's something that we can learn from the commercial farms, poultry and big commercial farms. There's something that is carried out that can be copied or followed by the ruminant sector for the ruminant sector to move forward. We have been trying to see if we could achieve self-sufficiency of about 30% in beef and mutton products in the country. And over the last 15 to 20 years, we've been talking about it, but so far we have not been able to achieve self-sufficiency as far as these food commodities are concerned. If you were to look at this slide I have here, in 2010, we have a self-sufficiency of about 30%, and it has hovered around that over the last 8 years. We're still at about 22% on this data of 2018. If we were to look at commodities, ruminant and swine population, for example, our cattle population has not increased tremendously. 744,000 in 2012. It has gone down a little to 737,000. This was the data of 2016. These are the cattle population within the country. Our buffalo population has remained the same. It has dwindled from 124,000, gone down to 119,000 in 2016. If you were to look at the goat population, we see similar trends, a reduction in numbers. If you look at the sheep population, not significantly different over the last 10 years. And if you were to look at the swine industry is also stagnant. It hasn't significantly improved over the last 10 years. There are of course certain issues associated with the swine industry, particularly after the Nipah virus disease that affected us in the late 80s. So and since then there has been a reduction in the number of swine production within the country. If you were to look at commodity production in terms of revenues, in terms of millions in ringgit, cattle and buffalo productions again, there is an increase, slight increase, perhaps because there are changes in the cost of production and commodity at farm level. Goat and sheep, again, that has increased. Pork, these are production value. They continue to generate the revenues for the nation. Chicken and duck has improved tremendously. Milk also as well, about the same. If we were to look at commodities of livestock in the ringgit million imports, our imports have increased. If we were to look at livestock product, the livestock product imports have also increased. So in total, we have actually increased the imports of livestock and livestock product. What it means is that there's probably a niche as far as local production is concerned. I hope you would be able to look at this slide. In 2012, production was 51.28 thousand metric tons, but the demand was 181,000 metric tons. And this has been increasing. The demand for beef and buffalo has been increasing, and in 2016, it has increased. The demand has increased to 208,000 metric tons. Again, chicken and lamb and mutton, the demand has been increasing, and pork demand has decreased. Chicken and duck, the demand is increasing. Chicken and duck is probably the king of meats as compared to other meat product that the country is producing. Chicken, duck, and eggs as well, they are increasing. The popular meat for the nation is still chicken and duck, and the effects of the COVID-19 may have implications on confidence of consumers towards this product. So these are some of the issues. And despite that, on a yearly basis, Malaysia continued to import, and the total import for goats over the years, it has been increasing. Goat has been increasing. Even poultry imports are continued despite the fact that we have self-sufficiency in poultry and swine. And of course, there are reasons for this, and some of this is probably related to parts or deboned chicken that we are bringing in from across the border, Thailand and perhaps China and some parts of Southeast Asia. Now that's the big picture, the view about the current situation as far as food commodities are concerned. Now, of course, in the Malaysian environment, when it comes to food, there are issues apart from production. We are talking about halal and toyi, halal and clean. Now, I'm going on to the next slide about the roles of veterinarian, the mandate veterinarians have. Most people, they think that the veterinarian, his function is in clinical practice, basically related to prevention, cure, or to alleviate of pain and the treatment of injuries in animals. But really, the function of a veterinarian goes beyond that, is to make sure people have access, regular access to high quality food so that they can continue to lead active normal lives. So our mandate is also to raise the levels of nutrition in livestock, what our livestock eat. So veterinarians have a role to play in animal nutrition, to monitor and maintain health, to make sure that they continue to be healthy, and put in place strategies to improve productivity. So over the years, the profession have actually played significant and contributory roles in animal health and in human health and welfare, food quality, food safety, food security, ecology, ethology, epidemiology, physiology, psychology, the development of drugs and pharmaceutical, biomedical research as educators, trainers, and policy makers, as well as in wildlife conservation. You find vets in wildlife conservation, you find vets in the wildlife department, you find vets in the pharmaceutical department, you find vets in animal nutrition, in the field of animal nutrition, in the field of genetics. You apart from vets, that you find your daily pet care veterinarian who is responsible for the health of your pet. Now, the veterinarian, I'm going to talk in the context of our role in the context of trying to achieve self-sufficiency and trying to make it possible. We have not been able to have a successful ruminant industry I don't have a picture of some of my local students doing extension work in livestock health, but it depends. On next slide, it depends on where we are, culture and communities. In some underdeveloped communities, veterinary extension methods for improving livestock. The slide before, the slide sebelum ni. Okay, in some underdeveloped communities where farmers are still illiterate, there are differences in level. If you were to look at the farming community that we have, that probably have in some of these underdeveloped communities, the farming community are people who are actually poor and illiterate. So a lot of this advancement or improvement towards healthcare will require a lot of extension work, particularly in education. You talk about veterinarians in communities that are more advanced. In Europe, for example, the West. Next slide, please. You see a different picture. You see animals in well-kept environment. You see veterinarians, of course, in environments, and the subject of talk is actually with regards to how to improve animal health and production. Next slide, please. The role of vets in pig farms and so on. They dress differently for different function. The requirements are different for different species of animals, and vets has got to regulate the risk factors with regards to the different species of animals are different, and vets have got to monitor, they've got to regulate the likelihood of situations, systems, environments that could affect animal health. Next slide, please. And more current and an issue among the animal production is microbial resistance, antimicrobial resistance, and antibiotic resistance. Perhaps we wonder, perhaps if COVID-19 has actually contributed, perhaps either to an abuse of drugs during movement restrictions. Farmers were not able to get access to veterinary healthcare. So under such circumstances, would they have actually abused the use of drugs to continue to ensure that their animals remain healthy or survive infections? Now, we are not sure of that. We don't know surveillance. Perhaps currently, I'm not aware of any surveillance that have been carried out to address this issue. But what is important is about the fact that the abuse of drugs in livestock is something that has been talked about, researched about in more recent years, and the veterinary community will have to play more important roles in ensuring that farmers do not abuse or do not have access to such drugs that they may procure upon themselves to decide to treat the animals. Next slide, please. People are going organic now, and farmers, they are not, a lot of farms that are producing milk and so on, they are, whether surveillance is being carried out, not strictly, vigorously, that is an issue. But the communities are going organic, and a lot of people are actually selling raw milk to the public. So there's a lot of risk with raw milk. How do we mitigate this risk of it reaching consumers, and how do we actually play a more important role in engaging with farmers so that they are aware of what is needed to ensure that their product that reach consumers are actually healthy products. I think there's a lot that need to be done here, especially in education of farmers. Of course, the demography of farmers in the country is changing. We used to have farmers who are basically people who do not have good education, probably illiterate, and highly dependent on veterinarians to advise them. We have farmers who follow traditional methods of managing and raising animals, and more recently, the government is encouraging young university graduates to actually partake in farming activities. Perhaps as the demography of this farming community change, then perhaps we would start to see some improvements in the way we manage farm animals and do things in the country. Next slide, please. I want to share a couple of other slides with you. Next slide, please. If you look at this next slide, you see a beautiful cow standing in the field. This is not a cow from somewhere outside Malaysia. This is a cow that you can now find within Malaysia itself. The cow on the left of this slide is worth 17,000 ringgit. If you look at the environment, the way the cows are kept, the murky, muddy areas, their food are actually within these muddy areas. But you are looking at a healthy cow, something is not quite right here. Technically speaking, if you're talking about the body of knowledge, we would expect these cows to have problems with their food, particularly as a result of spending long hours in these murky, muddy areas and so on. But look at the environment that the cows are in. Beautiful looking cows that are actually in an environment that perhaps we would not be proud to show off as a developed nation. So this is our role. The role, changing the landscape of the livestock industry. How do we encourage? It's a smallholder industry. How do we encourage smallholders to continue to keep good cows, as seen in this picture, but at the same time be responsible for the environment and the welfare of the cows? This is the example of how we use cows, these improved genetics against local Kedah Kelantan cows. And this calf you see on in this right picture, this calf you see is a 5-month-old calf that was fathered by this limousine bull. So these are some of the things that we want to point out. There are close to about 40,000 or so such farms in the animals in the state of Kelantan itself, close to another 40,000 or so of such beautiful looking animals in the state of Terengganu. I am well aware that some other states in the country are also looking at producing beautiful cows. Terengganu has its Katang Beef Project. Kelantan has its Sado Cattle Project. And a lot of these are actually initiatives by farmers. And perhaps the time has come for us as veterinarians to see how we can play a more important role in improving production in livestock production in the country, particularly on ruminant production. I think the swine and the poultry industry, we continue to help smallholders of swine and poultry industry, but this industry is well advanced and moving fast forward as a result of as a result of being more organized and as a result of controlling all the processes from farm to table. Now, the next slide is going to talk about how vets can play a role in animal production. We are talking about precision technology, application of very technical know-how in breeding animals. We are talking about artificial insemination in cattle. It's not something new. It's well advanced. It has taken foot very established in the country. There are a lot of people who have been trained to become inseminators and so on. It's a question of how do we persevere. We continue to assist farmers, particularly smallholder farmers. I'm not aware of large commercial scale cattle farms or large commercial scale beef farms that are really very successful. There is a very limited numbers of farms. I wouldn't want to name them, but there are very few farms in the country that are really successful. But there are a lot of issues, perhaps, on how we can actually help move this farm fast forward so that they can continue to become the role model for smaller communities or smaller farming families. Now, assisted reproductive technology, something that is being utilized by our neighbors, Thailand, Indonesia, have advanced as far as ruminant production is concerned because of animal reproductive technology. Unfortunately, we have not reached anywhere as far as the application of these technologies in livestock production, particularly beef and meat or mutton or chicken production is concerned. There are a lot of issues with regards to artificial insemination in small ruminants. We still have issues with success rate. And we're talking about embryo production and transfer. It's not a norm. It's not a practice in the country. It's a practice in our neighboring country, Thailand. It's a practice in Indonesia, practice in the Philippines to help fast forward or quantum leap their animal livestock production. So we don't have teams. There are people who are able to do this, but we don't have teams, and therefore it is important that we continue, that the government at least realizes this and continue to ensure and do the necessary to make sure that there are such teams coming up. It's a very small fraternity. The veterinary fraternity is about 2,000 at the moment. And at this point in time, a majority of those in active veterinary practice are in small animal practice. There are very few in large animal ruminant practice. And one of these issues that we want to address is actually to give the right incentives for these technologies to take off either at the university level or at the government's level with the Department of Vet Services. Now, we are aware that this is not rocket science. This is something that is feasible, possible. It can be done. We need to have the right people giving the right advice. Certainly, the people who should advise the country with regards to animal production, animal health, and so on should be veterinarians rather than non-veterinarians, contractors, architects, engineers, and so on. And I think the time has come for us to collaborate and work closely with the Ministry of Health and environmentalists and the environmental department to ensure that there is balance in the way we deal with animal health, the way we deal with the waste that are coming from these farming projects and establishments, and how we continue to ensure a good balance between human, the environment, and the animal health in the country. Technically speaking, we are talking about One Health, how we can engage One Health as a means of moving this country forward in terms of animal health and production. That, I think, would be the end of my presentation. This is a very general view, my point of view with regards to animal production and health in the country. I welcome questions from the audience, and probably if I'm not able to answer them, I get some help from friends around who's online as well. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Farhan. Over to you.
Thank you very much to Prof. Azam for the wonderful presentations. Now we move to the Q&A session. And the audience, you can write down your questions in the UMK official Facebook in the comment section. And so far, we have one question from Dr. Tani Pan to Prof. Azam. So, Prof, can you comment on what will be the prospect of the insect as a protein source in Malaysia, especially regarding the halal issue?
Okay, I think as far as insects are concerned, there are views on it. In Islam, dia ada banyak mazhab, and this is what I think. The Maliki school of thought says it's halal. The Hanafi school of thought says it's haram. Others, the Shafi'i and Hanbali, they are still debatable. Having said that, betul, there are communities. I think it depends on the insect that you're going to eat lah. I mean, you cannot eat every insect, kot. Jadi betul. With regards to that question, I think we will have to delve which insects are edible or possible to be classified as halal and toyib lah. I think that one eventually, when the time comes, it will be a matter of importance to us. Now, you have to remember that the community comprised of these world comprised of people who are Muslims and people who are not. So when it is a concern for halal and toyib among the Muslim community, among the non-Muslims, it is not. Jadi insect ni as a source of human alternative source for animal protein to humans, that may be an issue. But insect as a source of animal proteins in as animal feed, that that is something that is possible. For example, I'll give you an example. For example, they're talking about, there's a lot of interest now in cultivation of the soldier flies, larvae, and the cultivation of these soldier fly larvae for perhaps aquaculture feed, which is probably much cheaper than some of these other animal byproducts that are currently being fed to within the aquaculture industry. So I think there's room for us to explore. I remember I attended one particular event somewhere in Japan last year, last 2 years, and there was already talk about the role of veterinarians in insect farming in some of these other more developed communities.
Okay,
so
thank you.
It has not come to our attention yet lah, but it's something that we should start looking at lah.
Okay, I think at the same time there's a big potential for the insect farming as a protein sources. But now we have a second question from Mr. Wijaya Jayam.
Jaya.
Okay, great Prof for the sharing. How to prevent the large animal farmers doing their own treatment for their stock. Sometimes it may lead to the wrong diagnosis and treatment, which is give a big loss to the farmers later on. What do you think, Prof, on this issue?
Vijay, you know the answer, but never mind. Because Vijay has been going around visiting a lot of farmers and so on. This is a real issue. Perhaps the only way to address this is to increase outreach community, increase the outreach to the farming community, and that's important. Maybe one of our problems is that we don't have enough people to go around, and that's a big issue because we have farming communities. Our farming communities are usually in isolated areas, away from main roads. If you talk about a farm, where would a farm be? A lot of smallholders, where would the farm be? Would be away from main roads. It would be quite a distance from communities. If you're talking about ruminant sector, there are issues with regards to where you keep farm animals and so on, away from difficulty to get access to water, difficulty to get access to electricity. Farms have still got to continue to work on generators. Farm has still got to figure out about getting underground water. And these distances, they put them, you're talking about being away from vets, and farmers calling for vets to assist, and vets are not able to come around on time. So perhaps one of the ways to curb this is actually to ensure that the farmers are able to get the service they demand. Right now, the farmers request for service and they're not getting the services that they demand. What do you do when you don't get services that you demand? You take things into your own hand and you start to look for ways and means to solve your own problem. So farmers try to become independent of the professionals just because the professionals are not responding on time. You know, it takes a while for a vet to actually travel from wherever he is to a farmer's farm. So you see, a vet goes out and he spends half a day trying to get to a farm, and I'm sure vets who are on private practice and so on, revenues are important to them. So the number of cases are important. So if perhaps we should look at how we can ensure that there are more vets that are able to serve such communities. Or if we are not talking about vets, we are talking about those that can interface between the vet and the farmer. And I'm talking probably about trained animal technicians. Vijay, I hope you are happy with the answer.
I think I would like to add to that point. So the education is still, Prof, remain important keys lah, for us to have the small holder farmers. And then, Prof, can you further elaborate on this point? How we really, as a veterinarian, we're going to educate the farmers, especially in response to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Macam mana again, Farhan? Ask again the question.
So, as we know that the education is remain the important keys to help our small holder farmers, and then how, as a veterinarian, we educate the farmers, especially in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic.
I think the COVID pandemic, there's no issue. You see, whether there's a pandemic or no pandemic, our role remains the same. It's how we do things that change. Maybe the difference is in how we do things. Jadi as far as COVID-19 is concerned, and trying to ensure that the farmer is able to remain healthy lah, makna not affected by COVID virus ni, I think that the Ministry of Health is doing a good job already. I think everybody knows there are rhymes on it that the need to mask, the need to wash hands, the need to keep your distance, social distancing. I think this is all common knowledge and everybody is doing that. I think even if you go down into the village and you ask, even the villagers are aware of what has got to be done. So there's no issue there as far as COVID-19 is concerned. But with regards to training farmers, as far as the animal healthcare is concerned and so on, perhaps now, because, earlier on I was talking about where farms are situated, farming is a full-time job, 24/7. I mean, farmers cannot leave their farms to come to attend talks and so on. Special talks to educate them and so on. It will be difficult for farmers unless they have a farm hand to help them with their work. Most farmers have problems with farm hands because a farm has got to be of a certain size before you can actually get a farm hand. The regulation in the country does not allow for anybody, if I'm not mistaken, who have less than about 6 hectares of land to actually have a farm hand. So technically speaking, you cannot have a farm hand. And in Malaysia, difficult skill because this type of work, which requires labor and so on, a lot of people are not interested in doing it. If you go and work on a farm, we are talking about using your muscle rather than your brain sometimes to do a lot of that farm work. Now, a lot of Malaysians would not want to do that type of job. So we rely a lot on expatriate punya staff lah. And now, the difficulties in getting this expatriate staff because there are requirements for a certain size of land before you can actually get that staff. Jadi perhaps we have to relook at it because keeping even if you talk about a farmer who has 50 goats, katakan, the effort taken in taking care of 50 goats is as difficult as taking care of 200 goats. Jadi perhaps the government should look at certain policies to help make it easy for farmers to actually get farm hand to help them with their work. Jadi that is one thing. Two is what other ways that we can actually help to improve the communication and access to these farms. I think these are the things that we need to address. I've forgotten the question by now.
Okay, Prof. Thank you for the answer. Now we have another question from Dr. Maizan Muhammad from FTV. Prof, what do you think? Is it necessary for us to do a surveillance on the presence of the COVID-19 virus impacts, especially from the red zone area?
Actually, my personal view on it is I think this is necessary. Somehow, there are a lot of issues there. Absolutely essential, I think. Tapi somehow, ada gap. There's a gap between the Ministry of Health and the veterinary profession. You see, the issue remains: do these pets of people who are positive with apa dia kata COVID, who have been diagnosed infected with COVID ni, even though their pets do not show the sign, perhaps the pets do not show the signs of the disease, but do they harbor the virus? And it is possible for a reinfection as a result of these pets harboring the virus. Jadi, my feeling is that surveillance must go on, especially in households that have pets and the owners have been confirmed having infected with COVID. The point is how do we convince the ministry that perhaps this is a study that should be conducted. I am aware of Maizan, you're asking me that question. I'm aware that you tried to pursue research in that area, but somehow it was not recommended atau were not allowed access to those animals for which the owners have been infected with COVID. So I hope that probably would change with time lah.
Okay, Prof. Prof, another more question from private practitioner, Dr. Tan Chet Nam, from Johor. Regarding telemedicine, does FEV UMK plan to give any MOU or suggestion to the MVC to come out guidelines on the veterinary telemedicine? I think this is a very interesting question from Dr. Tan.
I think, to be honest with you, telemedicine is not new within the medical profession. In the medical profession, this has gone on for a long time. Cuma kita ni vets ni a little bit slow, perhaps in wanting to go along that line. There are some aspects that we can do dalam telemedicine ni. It doesn't mean that, it's my belief lah, it doesn't mean that if you do telemedicine that you compromise on quality or you compromise on ethics. There are ethics to it which we have to actually sit and draw guidelines and ethics on how to use telemedicine. And certainly, I think maybe we can suggest, after all, the Malaysian Vet Council, the fraternity is our fraternity. It's possible that we can suggest that over coffee, so that it doesn't appear like a pressure to the council. But certainly, apart from coffee table talk, it is something that we can put forward through the Veterinary Association itself, that perhaps we have to look at things differently now, because certainly a lot of the issues that are taking place around us, actually they quantum leap us into the future, and we have to be ready for the future. Jadi I think that's my answer for it lah.
Okay, Prof. And then Dr. Ibrahim Abdulaziz also comment that if vets do not survey COVID-19 in animals, so there's a little avenue to understand the virus dynamics in the community. I think I have another question to Prof. Azam. Prof, there is in the newspaper, the chicken supplier reported an increase of profits by up to 90% during the MCO. However, they also report a slight difficulty in sourcing for feed, as their existing supplies is already dwindling. So, as we know that the feed issues is a long-term issue related with the production. So, I want to know, Prof, what are the roles of veterinarian, especially those working as a policy maker at the national level, to handle and to mitigate this issue?
Soalan tu interesting tu. Macam susah sikit lah, tapi Tapi apa ni, I tell you what, you see, I think the poultry industry ni, dia punya reliance on corn and probably soybean is very high lah. It's been a while since I talked to any of my counterparts in the animal feed industry ni. Tapi my feeling is that the reliance on corn and soybean is very high. Now, kita ni, we are not a nation that produce corn or soybean. So we have to import. We have kelapa sawit, oil palm and rubber. I don't think animals can eat the rubber leaves lah. Kalau tak apa tu ni, tapi at the moment we have not found ways for which rubber punya byproducts can be part of animal feed. We'll forget about that for now. Tapi we are well aware that oil palm punya byproducts are well known for animal feed. You're talking about PKC,
PKE.
This is common. And in fact, I'm aware that we export a huge portion of our PKC overseas. For them to use in any animal feed. Jadi, if you're talking about poultry production ni, and you gave me the scenario where you say that they see profits, but at the same time they saw a reduction in difficulty in getting feed supply and so on. I don't know lah. These are reports. The maths doesn't add. You see, if they have problems importing feed, then they would probably have problems feeding their poultry, and therefore that would definitely result in a reduction in production. Now, that's common sense. So now to have difficulty in importing feed and at the same time getting good profits, there are a lot of issues there. Perhaps they raise the price of chicken. Perhaps they had an old stock of feed and that seeing them through this COVID-19 period. But the maths doesn't add. So I think probably this will require us, kalau betul lah that's the case, to actually look into some of the demographics, the due diligence on how the poultry farm is actually operating under the current circumstances. I think earlier on we were talking about kita punya role, our role now. You were asking our role, the policy maker ni. Basically, our role as veterinarians, and especially the one who sits in chairs or seats yang can influence policy maker, is to actually advise this policy maker back with quality data. I think the big issue currently now is that kita ni terlalu banyak ikut. There's a top-down punya instruction on a lot of these things, and issues on whether genuine data is being reported or not. I think that's a common problem within government organisation, because data probably, ni I punya pandangan lah, bukan pandangan my organisation, but my pandangan as an individual within the fraternity, from what is observed and so on. Takut yang kata brash statement ke apa, but it gives me an impression from the perspectives that I see that perhaps we are not really dealing with real data and using data wisely to make decisions. That's our main problem. So policy maker ni dia kena people sitting in that seat must be able to advise our policy maker. Now, who is advising our policy maker when it comes to livestock production in the country? How we deal with livestock? I don't think you're looking at livestock veterinarians who have the guts to state what they have to say and make a relevance to the industry. Jadi kita perlu, sebab kadang-kadang pandangan kita, I know I speak this because I know it from myself, it's my character, that sometimes you have to speak and you've got to speak your mind, and your mind is based on facts and the data that you get around you. So you got to use those data and you got to convince. And perhaps one of our weaknesses is our ability to convince, to influence. And people who sit in that chair must have the ability to convince, must have the ability to influence for the industry to move forward. Itu pandangan saya.
Terima kasih Prof atas pandangan tu. Prof, kita ni berada, so we are at the end of the session.
Actually saya minta maaf sebab actually I've never, this is my first time apart from online learning, my first time doing a live apa tu presentation lah. Dia tak biasa. It takes a while to get used to it. Tapi by the time I'm getting used to it, we are already at the end of the session. I was like this at the beginning. Because by the time I come towards the end of it, I'm suddenly feeling comfortable. I'm suddenly feeling okay, and actually I can go on and on, you know. Tapi you are telling me now that we're coming to the end of it.
Yes.
So I know with practice, I think it becomes perfect. Thank you very much. My regrets if I did not say the necessary. I'm not worried about whether I say it right or wrong, but I'm more concerned about saying the necessary. And I hope that I did not bore my fellow colleagues and audience. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, as science goes, to every beginning there's an ending, and now the talk series has come to its end. Once again, I would like to thank everyone for gracing our session with your presence, and thank you to all audience for your positive feedback, and we are truly appreciative. And on the behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to appreciate Prof. Dr. Muhammad Azam for the remarkable talk and sharing with us today. And thank you everyone, and see you again. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bye.
Yeah.